Hello, my name is Robin Kay, and I'm a professor at UIT in Oshawa, Canada, and it is my pleasure to discuss this paper examining laptop-based off-task behaviors in secondary school classrooms. So, why do we need this study? Well, in higher education, distractions with laptops and mobile devices is well researched and appears to be a growing problem. There are clearly benefits to using laptops, but there are clear problems in the form of distractions. Now, there's an increased use of laptops in high school, especially with bring your own device programs. So the question is, are we putting students at risk? Are mobile devices in the forms of laptops or tablets or phones more of a distraction than a benefit? Now, previous research has pointed out benefits and challenges. Benefits have been increased in student performance, improvements in communication, and overall better learning experiences. But there have been problems as well. Distractions from peers, off-task behaviors, and decreases in performance. So where are the gaps? Well, as I said before, there's been no research in secondary school classrooms on distractions. The details of distractions, what is the actual behavior and what's going on, is unclear even in the higher education research. And there's been limited focus, somewhat surprisingly, on the factors that actually cause the distractions. It's assumed that the laptops cause the distractions, but this study will look at other factors that might influence students and their behaviors. It's a pretty straightforward methodology. 224 secondary school students were surveyed from 4 different schools across Canada. It was an online survey with 12 Likert scale questions, 9-point Likert scale questions, and there were several open-ended questions. So let's get right to the results. Almost 80% of the students were on task, frequently or almost always. So that while we emphasize the distractions and perhaps the negative parts of laptops, it appears that 8 out of 10 students were on task most of the time while using a laptop in class. When they were off task, there were a number of behaviors that they engaged in. Email, surfing the web, and social media were the top 3. As you can see, we have somewhere between 50 to 75% of students on occasion or always using email or surfing the web or using social media when they were distracted. Instant messaging and playing games occurred less often. So let's look at the factors that might influence these distractions. What about peer influence? Well, on the 9-point scale, it was a mean score of 3.7, which indicated that students were distracted by their peers' device on occasion. And in fact, 50% were never distracted by peers' device. And that's interesting because there is some research in higher education that indicates a peer device is a significant distraction, but not so in the secondary school classroom in this study. So this question here asked, how helpful were laptops in specific subject areas? So if they're particularly useful or helpful, probably they would not influence or cause distractions. So let's take a look here. In social studies and language, and in other areas with technology and the arts, students found laptops to be helpful most of the time. 80 to 90% found them to be helpful on occasion or always. And this is also the case to us, but with a different spread of numbers with science. So it was more on occasion, and 50% always found that laptops were helpful. Math, on the other hand, was not rated as a subject where laptops were particularly helpful. And the important thing is here, we don't know what they're doing with laptops. And when we ask students open-ended questions, it appears that they were note-taking. So it's not necessarily using the laptop for higher level activities. So that's important. Subject area has an influence. Social studies and language, well, they're taking notes, and technology, obviously they're going to be using the computer as in digital arts. But a lot of the time, students appear to be taking notes. That may not be the best use of laptops. What about instructional method? What's going on in the class? Well, we have independent work, group work, lecture, and student presentations. And it's interesting that students were distracted on occasion or always, almost 85% of the time, with their laptops when they were doing independent work or constructive work or assigned work, and 60% of the time when they were doing group work or collaborative work. And that's we would expect maybe that they would be more engaged when perhaps doing group work or independent work and practicing and constructing knowledge. But we don't know exactly what was going on in the class. For the assigned independent work and group work in the classes for this study, though, students were off task. Whereas in the lecture, they were on task or never distracted 50% of the time. The numbers are quite low. I mean, sometimes they were distracted on occasion and always here, almost 50% actually. However, it's less than group work and independent work. And then student presentations were even less. When students were presenting, students watching were on task. Now, in delving into the reasons why, we take a look at the lecture, and these are small classes, 30 students, easy to observe. So the difference with higher education is that students are being monitored and being watched, so they're unlikely to be off task on their laptops. And with student presentations, several students said they thought it would be rude and disrespectful if they were off task, so they stayed on task. So that's an interesting mix in terms of the influence of instructional method on distractions. We also looked at the influence of gender. There were no differences in email behavior, surfing the web, or instant messaging. However, males used social media significantly less than females, and males play games significantly more than females. So social media for female students and playing games for male students as a trend. Obviously, that does not reflect all males or all female students. So there seems to be some sort of gender influence on the type of distraction chosen. So we asked students to make suggestions for making laptops more useful, and they said, we'd like to see the improved quality of integration. Technology could be more useful in class if teachers understood how to use it properly. More online tools would allow the class to collaborate online, and if the activities and assignments were done in class were more interactive, it would be harder to get off task. So make the quality of integration more engaging and effective. The other thing that students asked for was supervision. We could make laptops less distracting by placing them in a bin, and the teacher should have students closing the devices during certain parts of the lesson. These are two sample comments, but students did want more supervision. They weren't ready at that age to monitor and control their own behavior. Future research might include tools like rescue time that actually monitor on behavior on the laptop as students are using a laptop during class. That would be really helpful instead of relying on student self-report. Interviews and focus groups would get at some of the details and the questions about why distractions are occurring. And I think we need to closely monitor teaching strategies and what's actually being done in the class with the laptops. There's my contact information.